Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure today to rise virtually on the first budget table in over 2 years. Before I would begin, I'd like to congratulate the Minister on Finance on being the first female to table a budget. Whatever our differences in beliefs, this is a significant step towards equality, and I congratulate her. While I am pleased that the government finally tabled a budget, that is unfortunately where my positive comments mostly end. My hope was that this budget would contain provisions.
The Honourable Member for Niagara has a point. He's rising on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, just on a point of order, I'd just like to remind my colleague and good friend that he was going to notify the Speaker that he would be splitting his time.
Do we have an agreement from the Honourable Member from Northumberland South?
I might agree. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no.
Please.
I would. It is my pleasure to split the time with a member from Niagara Falls, the fabulous member from Niagara Falls. Thank you very much. As I was continuing, my hope was that this budget would contain provisions that would provide a road for economic recovery. Unfortunately, while this government announced record spending, they did not introduce a responsible economic recovery plan. This is something that my constituents are rightfully concerned about, as the debt that will be incurred will be felt for literally generations. The temporary measures put in place during the pandemic were always seen by myself as a bridge to brighter days, a future where Canadians could return to their normal lives, content in the knowledge that Canada was secured by a thriving private sector and a supportive government. However, increasingly it appears this government is content to build a bridge to nowhere, a future not of abundance and freedom, but instead characterized by debt-created scarcity. In a report last week, the C.D. Howe Institute warned fiscal stability would be jeopardized by the prospect of other expensive initiatives recently floated by the federal government. The fact that the private sector is recovering through its own determination, perseverance, and innovation seems to be not deterring this government from making record expenditures. An improving economic outlook has weakened the case for stimulus, is what the RBC said, though the government's appetite to spend hasn't changed. The Liberal government's solution may very well do more harm than good, Madam Speaker. A recent Parliamentary Budgetary Office report noted that another stimulus package is not what's needed now. While temporary stimulus of this magnitude would likely provide a significant boost to the Canadian economy, it would result materially in larger budgetary deficits and higher federal debt over the long and medium term. None of the spending is conditional. The government is going to spend it anyways, without knowing what will happen in the economy in 3 to 5 years out. The public is completely, unfortunately, being desensitized to these massive deficits. Running $30 billion for one program used to be a lot of money. This is revenue that could be directed to support our important social safety net. For example, in 2026, the government will spend $8.3 billion on childcare, but $39 billion on debt interest payments. Every day this year, Madam Speaker, we will spend $422,465,750 more than what we will generate in revenue. Every Canadian is taking on more than $100 every day in new federal debt. For a family of four, that equates to more than $3,000 a week in new federal debt. Many families do not earn $3,000 a week in total, much less taking on $3,000 each week in new federal debt. The government's own fiscal projections show that in 4 years, we may have a debt to GDP ratio of under 50%. Madam Speaker, talk about moving the goalposts. This rivals them setting a target for vaccinations that if we achieve, we may be in the top 100 in the world. According to this projection, this unremarkable achievement is a goal that we shouldn't be attempting to achieve. But even if we do attempt to achieve it, it may be impossible. Because the problem with this idea is that it expects nothing unexpected to happen. But we know, Madam Speaker, from 9/11 to the great financial meltdown to the global pandemic, nearly always something unexpected happens. Prime Minister Harper rebuilt our financial house after the financial crisis of 2008, which allowed us to weather this latest crisis despite 5 years of excessive spending. The challenge we are facing now is that we will simply not be able to weather another significant economic shock. The next shock could come in any number of forms. Perhaps a collapse in the housing market, the escalation of global tension, a rise in inflation or a rise in interest rates, the devastating impacts of climate change. Because even though we in this House have committed to reducing our carbon output, China continues to dramatically increase theirs. Nobody, including the Prime Minister's millionaire friends who helped to draft this budget, know when the next shock could be. What will we do, Madam Speaker, if in fact this shock happens? If in fact we have a GDP to debt ratio in excess of 50% or even below, just below 50%, we simply will not have the firepower to respond to it. Maybe, Madam Speaker, we will get extraordinarily fortunate. Maybe we won't experience an economic downturn in the next 10 years. Maybe interest rates will remain at historical lows, and maintaining a 50% debt to GDP ratio might just be sustainable. However, even if that were the case, I still have some skepticism that this government will be able to stay within their means. The best projections of the future are usually generated by studying the past. This government was elected in 2015 with a promise to deliver a balanced budget after running several tiny, itsy-bitsy, modest deficits, and then maintaining surpluses for the remainder of their mandate. This, however, did not happen. The budget did not balance itself, as it turns out. And you know what? To balance that budget, it would have taken relatively modest tweaks to either increasing revenue or reducing spending, but the government simply lacked the ability or the discipline or the will to make this happen. Achieving a debt to GDP ratio of less than 50% will require a massive reduction in government expenditures in the coming years and will involve tough decisions, including inevitably bringing an end to many of the pandemic support programs. This government, who could not reduce spending or grow revenue by billions pre-pandemic, is now telling us they will reduce spending, not by billions, but by hundreds of billions. Please excuse my skepticism on this. The finance minister, in her budgetary address, repeatedly stated that her plan for the future will grow the economy out of debt. You know, in principle, I agree with that. I agree with that approach. Economic growth is the best and maybe the only path forward to help us maintain our jobs and pay down our massive debt. However, this budget simply will not achieve that stated objective. This budget continues the unprecedented level of spending and government interference in the economy. Over 2,000 years of economic history has proved to us over and over and again, government, while they can build a framework to support businesses, cannot create economic growth in themselves. Let me be clear that only the private sector, only our Canadian workers, through their perseverance, tenacity, work ethic, and innovation, can expand our economy. However, while governments cannot in themselves create economic growth, they can certainly inhibit or even stop economic growth. By overburdening the private sector with needless regulation and excessive taxation. The budget's forecast of $1.4 trillion of national debt has the potential to starve our economy and our future businesses of the capital they need to grow and expand their businesses. The servicing costs of this debt will force our government to put a greater burden on our workers and confiscate their ability to invest in our economy. So why then would this government table a budget that introduces unneeded stimulus and massive amounts of spending? Well, the French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville once wrote, and I loosely paraphrase, that democracy will endure until the day that politicians realize that they can bribe people with their own money. It is clear to me that this government is utilizing the power of a budget to table an election platform, not an economic recovery plan, with the hopes of buying Canadian votes with their hard-earned money. Madam Speaker, we have reached a moment of truth, a tipping point. If not on this budget, then in the next election. We must decide whether we believe in Canadians or in an ever-expanding federal government. Do we believe in democracy or bureaucracy? Do we believe in Canadians' ability to decide their own destiny or in an ever-growing centralized government that controls Canadians' lives? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Well, Madam Speaker, the rhetoric is rich today. The member started off in the beginning of his speech by talking about how Stephen Harper saved us from great turmoil during this time because Stephen Harper had put the right conditions into the economy for the economic growth that we had. But then later in his speech, he said, and I quote, the government cannot create economic growth. So he's basically saying Stephen Harper is to get all the credit for us being able to get through this time, but at the same time he said the governments cannot create economic growth. Can he try to explain to me why he thinks that it is the case that Stephen Harper was able to do it, but yet in the same speech he says governments generally speaking can't do it?
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you. And I always enjoy the vim and vigor, if not the content of this member's interventions. And so what I would say to him is what I said in my speech, is that the government absolutely has a role. It is a role to create framework in order to make a fair and equitable economy, but it's private sectors that ultimately generate growth. And in some cases, and in fact, many cases, the best thing the government can do is get the heck out of the way.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And let me first compliment the honourable member on a fantastic speech, and I think he outlined very well one of the stark contrasts that exists within this place between the left-leaning ideologies of the three other parties and Canada's conservatives that are ready to get this country moving. I would ask him to comment further on the glaring debt scenario. Certainly when I read through the budget, I see not only a disastrous fiscal path that our country is on, but the real debt management strategy of this government is to simply refinance, and then refinance some more. I'd ask the honourable member to comment on that.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and through you to the member. The reality is that there is only so much capital, so much money that is out there, and if in fact we direct those monies to the private sector, we get jobs, we get taxes, and then we can sustain our important social safety net. But if debt starts to take off more and more, siphon more and more of that capital, that income away from the private sector, we get into a negative spiral where we'll have higher taxes, lower government services, as we saw underneath the Chrétien era.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his excellent speech. I appreciated his comments about this idea of resilience, the fact that our institutions need to be prepared for further shocks that could come. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected, to prepare for the possibility of serious disasters and to respond to it. And I think the point is made very well that if we aren't prepared for the possibility of major disasters, if we don't have the fiscal capacity to respond, then we're leaving ourselves in a great deal of danger for the future. I wonder if the member can share further just the importance of building resilience, of not assuming that everything's just going to always be fine going forward, and of preparing ourselves financially and other respects for the possible challenges that we might face in the future.
Honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
I thank the member for his excellent question. And I happen to serve on the Public Accounts Committee. And so I hear the Auditor General repeat again and again and again, governments must be prepared for the unexpected. We must plan. It's not exciting to invest those monies, but unless we have the resources to respond, we will be in a difficult situation. And increasingly underneath this Liberal government, both in good times and bad, we've spent away those resources so that when we get hit by that next shock, we may be in a very difficult position, and that's why we need to secure the future.
A very brief question from the honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to make a comment. We've had decades of trickle-down economics with tax cuts to the wealthiest and to the corporations, and it hasn't worked. And when you put stimulus money into the economy and you provide for people to ensure that they can make ends meet, that's trickle-up economics. And that money is spent in our communities, and it helps our economy grow. It helps small businesses. It helps.
Very, very quick and brief comment from the honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, I think that's just factually incorrect. If we look at Venezuela's Soviet Union, Cuba, you can see what that creates. Those type of socialist policies create scarcity and poverty. I'm for abundance and freedom and for the Canadian